Well, welcome everyone. We are going to go ahead and get started. My name's Eva, and
just wait just a couple hours.
when Art's ready, we'll get started.
Alright.
So we wanted to thank everyone for coming. We have a sponsor proceeding towards the end of our presentation. Stewards will be sitting in a Sunday bar, and then Palenville and Hamlet has orchestrated this whole event, and we've seen the advertisement and all that coming from them. Our agenda this evening is some stories from people who are buried in the Palenville Cemetery. And these are the stories that we're going to hear, and in the order that we're going to hear them. They're chronological, so we're going to start with one of our oldest burials, which is Hannah van der Bogart, who happened to marry into the Paladin family. And we're going to finish with one person who's not buried here, but lived in Palenville and has a very interesting connection to the area, and Jill's going to present about her. So if you're presenting, take a moment to locate yourself and where you are in that list, so you know what to expect. When you do present, we're recording both what you're presenting and what's on the screen, so do your best not to block the screen as you present. And any questions before we get started?
3 to 5 minutes.
Yes.
At 5 minutes, do you just turn it off?
And then, as you're presenting, if you have things to pass around, I'm also going to be displaying those up on the screen as well. But some of the things like articles and journal entries, it's a little bit easier to have the item up front. So just know that you may be seeing duplicates of things, but that's why we're doing that. All right, so we're going to start with.
Hi. I'm representing Hannah. Last time I wore a skirt and I said I was Hannah, but I'm not going to impersonate her tonight. I'm going to tell you about her life. Hannah van der Bogart was the daughter of Peter van der Bogart, and another Hannah from Kingston. And she was born in 1787. And at age 19, she married Gilbert Paladin. And they lived in this house, which is, I'm going to pass this around. It's on top, right, left. There. Oh, okay, so I don't have to pass this around. It's over here.
Oh, wait. There we go. I thought I had a laser pointer, but I do not.
Over there. Okay, and that's the bridge, you can see. Yeah, there's the bridge. Generate around that. Gilbert was, and again, some of this may be right and some of it may not be so right. He was, Gilbert Paladin was a partner in the tannery with his brother Jonathan. And together they had 8 children, but Gilbert only lived to be 39. And of the 8 children, 4 of them died before Hannah did. Hannah lived to be 70. So she was married at 19. She had 8 children in 14 years. She's pretty good at this. Now, I read somewhere that Gilbert is the first stone in the cemetery. I don't know if that's true.
Of the visible stones, it's Elizabeth Townsend, who also married a Palin. She would be the earliest death with a stone.
Brother.
Yeah.
Okay. So the most famous son was Rufus, who also lived only to be 37. His father lived to be 39. And by the way, these I just looked it up. These are short lifespans even for this time. At this time, the average lifespan was about 64. So he died young. Rufus was a postmaster in Palenville, and then he went to Congress for a term. And he contracted tuberculosis while he was there. I mean, it makes sense because Washington was a swamp, right? And then he died a year after he finished his term, so that's very sad. There was a daughter, Catherine, and there was a son, James. He also died at 36. He and his wife both died. He died in 1846 and she died in 1847, and they left 3 children who Hannah raised. But those aren't the only ones she raised. Her daughter Caroline died in childbirth at age 36, I think, and she had 5 children who Hannah raised because her husband ran off out west and married somebody else who had 5 more children. But he left 5 to the grandmother. Her son Joseph lived quite a long time, and he lived a long time. He was one of the only ones who died after her daughter Harriet died at age 21. So at the end, after all these people died, she's got 8 grandchildren to raise, because when Gilbert died, she had a 1-year-old and a 2-year-old. So she's pretty busy. Then Gilbert's brother moved in with her, Joseph, who was a shoemaker. And Mariah, her daughter Mariah, who never married, lived with her. So that's who she was left with. And this is, she went to the local store, and here in the ledger, you can see that she bought some oats. It's in the middle. Oh, you can put that up so you can't read it. I can't read the date or anything. Okay. So here is Hannah Palin, widow, and her purchase. Okay, so I just want to say something about the tanneries. I imagine this is how they made their money. Rufus was quite a businessman, the one who went to Congress. Tanneries were a very dirty business, very unecological in every way. When they peeled the bark from the trees either died standing up, or they cut them first and then peeled the bark. Then they put them in the soup with chemicals, and it really smelled like, really bad. So it was not a very healthy place to grow up. Maybe that's why all these people died. I don't know. But it was, it was a great business. Okay, any other questions? Good.
Hello, everybody. My task is to tell you what I know about Louis Barton. He was born in 1819 and died in 1904. That's his gravestone. On the back of his gravestone are the name of a son, and surrounding the gravestone are a couple of markers that are probably for children who died in their lives, and there's one that is definitely for his daughter over there. In any case, he was born in Bengal in Dutchess County. I didn't even know it was a Bengal until I started to do this, but they have a post office and a zip code over there. It's a small place on the eastern side of Dutchess County, about 6 or 7 miles north of Newark. He shows up here in real estate transactions and things like that, somewhere around the 1830s or 40s. He buys some land and different things like that. But he marries in 1847 a lady named Rhoda Ann Gardner, and they're married in the Kiskatone Reformed Church. At that time and over the next couple of years, different censuses show that he's got 3 kids and then a couple of more kids and things like that they've had over the time goes on. He's identified early on as a chair manufacturer. Later on, he's a turner. At one point, they say he ran a bowling alley around 1900, shortly before he died. He's identified as a sawmill, the sawmill owner, and running the bowling alley. And he owned the turning mill, which is what I guess is most famous. He's most famous for, because there's a painting of it. He owned the turning mill, which is on the creek on the south bank, maybe 100 or 200 yards west of the Swinging Bridge. It's a ruin there, and I have a picture of it taken in probably in 1886, and it was a ruin then in this book of Picturesque Catskills by Delisser. In any case, he owned a turning mill that was just up from the Swinging Bridge. Now, what did the turning mill do? It probably did some furniture spindles and things like that. But this is what the lister says. He came by on a jaunt in the 1880s or so forth, and he stopped at Barton's Mill. We continue up the back road, close by the creek, pausing at Barton's Mill to see the souvenirs of the Catskills, turned out of native wood by native skill, as the legend reads. Curious things they are, these souvenirs. Mountain sticks, as pretty as they are useless, inkstands, paper cutters, little pails, and a host of other articles of every conceivable suggestion and embodiment of an active imagination, stimulated by that manna in the wilderness, the dollar of the summer people. So that's what Mr. Belisser said about the turning mill and what was made there. Now, one of the things about the turning mill is that George Hall, who was a prominent artist of the late 1800s, had a studio up at the far end of town, right by Edmonds Bridge there, and a house there. And one of the things that he did was a still life of the turning mill, which is right there, which he exhibited in the National Gallery of Design, the National Academy of Design in 1880. And he lived, this man Hall lived in Palenville most of the summer and into the fall, and then the rest of the year he spent either at a studio in New York or over in Europe. But in any case, that's the picture of the turning mill. It was known as the only establishment like this that had two lathes. So there's somebody working at the lathe right here. There's another lathe right in here that's not being used. This man might be might be Barton himself, but it's probably his son, or maybe a son-in-law. Just judging by the fact that he looks younger than Barton would have looked in 1880. These two ladies are probably tourists. They're dressed in kind of tourist clothing. This man over here may be somebody who is one of his friends who dropped in to talk to him for a while. He's not dressed in work clothes. He seems to be relaxing there. He's probably already stood up, as one of the critics says, he's probably already stood up to greet the ladies and sat back down. You can't see out, well, maybe you can from over there, but this lady is holding up some kind of piece of gingerbread, something that's been turned, maybe a vase or some other kind of thing like that. She might be asking how much it costs. Here's one of those walking sticks. He's got one of them, and in a clearer picture, there's a number of them sitting right here, those walking sticks. In any case, that's the turning mill that Mr. Barton probably founded and left to his son. Although if this is the son that's on the back of that monument there, he died in 1899, which is a couple of years before Lewis himself died. He died in 1904, and his wife died in 1906. He was 10 years older than she was. Over at the grave, you can see that, but down maybe 10 feet this way, there's a marker that says father and mother. So where those two are buried is there. And then around it looks like somebody put down new stones with the initials of some of their kids. And then there's one old monument there that's identified as his daughter. So that's what I know, or think I know, about Mr. Barton and his work here in Catskills. If you go over there, his grave is number 10 on this old map. Here's the entrance to the cemetery, and the road that cars can go on is up around here. So just take a right turn in there, right past this grave that's surrounded by a stone wall, right over past it a little bit. It's surrounded by this is where the road is, right over here where you pass this is where the Barton grave is, right there. And it's well, you can see there, it's a pretty sizable piece of monument. So that's what I know about them. Thank you very much.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just
going to ask a question. The turning mill, I thought, continued on into the middle of the 1900s.
It may have, but in here,
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, well, Josie Edwards,
right, yeah.
Josie Edwards says that the guy in the photo is actually son-in-law Post when he was younger, because she used to bring her daughter. He lived across the street where it's right next to the turning mill, it's the White House. Supposedly he lived there in the,
Right.
One of the,
40s and 50s.
one of the other possibilities of that person is his son-in-law also. It says either Jim.
well, Josie says that the guy claimed that was his big claim to fame, was he was in that famous band.
Those windows facing west, and they were there until Irene. Irene took that
Oh,
whole
wow.
west end out, and that was the end of that. But they were there until
Here's,
2011.
here's a small picture of the turning mill from about the late 1880s, or the middle 1880s. This book originally came out in 1886, and so this is from before that. And it looks like it's a ruin right here. There's stuff falling around all kinds of, but it's called the Old Barton Turning Mill.
Well, in the bowling alley that you talk of, that building is still there.
Is it still there? Yeah.
Yeah, if you go to the end of my property, it's the building, the red building to the left with the long corridor. You can see there with like 2 alleys there.
Yeah.
And supposedly pins and balls are still in there made out of wood that were made at the turning mill.
I haven't been over that way in about 35 years.
And one thing.
Yeah, if you ever want to see it,
I would love to see
I'll
it.
show you where it is and then we can talk to Christine, maybe
Has
get
this
into it.
hat.
Okay.
And Owen always said that it was the hat that was in that picture. And it did come out of the turning mill. So don't claim, it hasn't been, you know, underscored yet, but there's a chance.
Thank you.
Hello. My name is Maddox, and I'm going to be telling the story of Amelia A. Breitmeyer. Amelia A. Breitmeyer was born in 1836 in Saugerties, New York. She was married 3 times and had 2 sons and 1 daughter. She died in 1904 in Palenville, New York, at the age of 68 and was buried there. She is now buried in the Palenville Cemetery. She was born in 1836, and by the time she was 14, she was already a live-in servant, and she spent a lot of her life going from town to town. For the next 3 censuses, she was in different households, every single one. And then 1865, she married William Bartholomew when she was 29 years old. William was also her employer, so they lived together at the time. And in 1866, 2 years later, her son Irving was born in July 1866. And then 2 years later, her son Reveal was born. Reveal Bartholomew. And then her son Reveal passed away in 1870 at the age of 2. And in 1872, her husband William passed away. They had been married for 7 years. So now she had her son and went to be a servant in another place. And then 2 years later, she married Lumen Lamoury, who was also buried in the Palenville Cemetery, when she was 38 years old. And they lived in Palenville. And then her daughter, Louis B., was born in 1879 with Lumen. And then Lumen passed away at the age of 68, and they had been married for 13 years. And then 4 years later, she married Lester H. Cass in Palenville when she was 55, only 4 years later. And for the rest of the time, she lived in Catskill, married to Lester. And then Lester passed away after they had been married for 11 years. And then a year later, she died when she was 68. Yeah, so she's buried in Palenville Cemetery. Yeah.
Yes.
I noticed some people say Palenville and some people say Palenville.
Yes.
That's her fault.
I did a presentation last week at the Greene County Historical Society about some of the stories of people buried in the cemetery, and I consistently said the Palenville Cemetery, and then at the end when I said, are there any questions, it was, why do you say Palenville? It was really Palenville.
Oh, Oh, you just decided to say Paladin?
I just was like, I'm gonna be consistent throughout my whole presentation, and I just picked one pronunciation to use, and it was a big.
I mean, it's not like old timers say Paladin.
I never heard anybody say it.
I've never heard it said.
I've only heard it as Palenville, but.
All right, I'm
who
working
knows-
on my accent.
But who knows what it was in the 1800s?
Right. We will never know.
Irvingville.
Yeah.
It was Irvingville
No
for 10
way.
years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, isn't that correct?
Irvingville.
Yeah, I thought so.
But that's
Five to
it,
10 years.
because I know a lot of people who say Palenville, so you're not alone.
Well, now I'm paying attention to who says it.
But you know, it's
I grew up
just
in
people
Palenville.
now, they
Everyone
just
just
know
said
it as
When I moved
Palenville,
up
and
there, everybody called it Palenville.
it's interesting.
Because it's named after the Palins,
Right,
but maybe they were the Palins.
right.
Like I said, who knows about what was in the 1700s, 1800s?
English is crazy.
Also, Winnie just pointed out that there was about a, I think, 5 to 10 year period where it was renamed Irvingville after the author of Rip Van Winkle. And then they,
Oh, cool.
Like the Irving School.
right.
Probably Catskill vetoed it.
Well, after about 10 years, apparently, Rip Van Winkle went out of popularity, so they said, oh, let's go back to Palenville or Palenville, whatever it was.
Hey, that guy's the father of my person.
Oh.
Cool.
Eva,
Yeah, but who's doing Roland?
who's doing Roland, Artie?
Oh, I am. That'd be me.
Let's leave the discussion.
Yeah. I wanted to do Roland because my wife and I sort of have a connection to the Trumpet family. We've been living in their home for 50 years. And when they left it, they left all their possessions there. So we lived with them for 50 years. We also had a friend, after a talk here on TAN, we invited a couple friends back up. And Linda Nichols, you know, Linda. She's sort of a clairvoyant, but she had never been in the house, and we were sort of a little friendly. But she took 2 steps in the house and said, oh, there are 4 other people here. And she named 2 of the people that died in the house. The third one, she was very close to the third name. The 4th, we have no idea who that would be. Got her attention. But anyway, Roland was born in 1839 to Eliza and Mary Barton Trombore. And they lived up at the Intimates Bridge. Back then it was called Trumper's Corners, because his father owned a dry goods store there and a barn. They sold hay and feed, plus it was a country store, dry goods, whatever you needed, they had. He had 2 brothers, George and Franklin, one younger, one older, and 3 sisters, Henrietta, they called her Etta, Julia, and Adele. Up at that clove there at that time, there was a country store, a blacksmith shop, a tailor shop, a woolen mill, a boarding house, a hotel, and at one time a bowling alley. A lot of his business came from East Hunter, which was a village about halfway up the mountain. He sold, Roland's father sold the store to George Hall, and that became his studio for 15 years. Among other things, Roland became a teamster and then joined the Union Army in 1861. Franklin's brother joined in 1864, became a POW at the New Market in the Shenandoah Valley, and died at Andersonville Prison. His last letter home was June '64. And Roland met his first wife, Rachel Winecoop, after the war while working as a driver for the Trumpet Family who owned the Laurel House. She had been orphaned in 1856 and they took her in. And Roland and Rachel had 3 children, Frank in '66, Nellie in '69, and Elizabeth in '72. Rachel became ill and was nursed by a young woman, Jenny Kraft, until her death in 1890. After her death, Roland sent a letter. She left after his wife died. He sent a letter to Jenny imploring her to come back and help with the 3 girls. Did anybody catch that? Frank was a girl. Would have thought. He named his first child after his brother, regardless of gender.
Boy named Sue.
Around this time, he became acquainted with George Harding of the Harding Hotel. Very famous patent attorney, rich, and Roland sold Mr. Harding a piece of property across the street from the house to start the turnpike, Harding Turnpike, which led up to the hotel. And their relationship lasted for a number of years until Harding died in the early 1900s. There was letter correspondence, we have correspondence back and forth of what trees should be cut here, and he micromanaged the place. But Roland worked for him for about 20 years in different capacities. Teamster, ice foreman when they cut ice in the winter, cutting timber, etc. So when Jenny came back, after about a year or so, her and Roland got married and they had 2 children. George was born in '83 and Eva in '86. It turns out it's funny, he named 3 of his children after his siblings. And all of his children survived to adulthood, which was unusual back then. Frank, the oldest girl, married, you're gonna figure this out with a pencil, married Roland's second wife's sister's widower. Yeah. And she moved up to the Troy area. Nellie married a Mr. Henry Conrad, a music teacher, New York City and Brockport. Elizabeth Mary became a school teacher, died in Brockport. George became a plumber, carpenter, and tradesman. I don't remember him, but he died at 54. Maybe you remember, Ron, I don't know.
What was the name?
George Chumper. And Eva, the youngest, became a teacher, taught at the Ramsey Schoolhouse in Kiskaton for 2 years. Then went to normal school at Noyon and got her teacher's degree and taught at Huntington, Long Island and East Orange, New Jersey until 1952. She died in 1970. And a little excerpt here. Roland and Jenny, they did whatever, it's like everybody else. They canned their own food, they had their own cow, they bought large pieces of meat. But they had a brooder house, which is still up there, with a really elaborate kerosene burning incubator and a pretty large chicken house. So they sold a lot of eggs and chicken for cash, I guess. When they sold to boarding houses. Roland became ill in 1924 and 25. His daughter took him to New York to see a specialist, but he passed away in December 1926. That's over.
Good evening, I'm Theodore Teal. I'll be 180 years old next month. And I've spent most of my life in Palenville, but you've probably never heard of me or my family. My dad, Charles Teal, was from Rhinebeck, and my mother, Carlina, was from Catskill. They moved to Palenville in 1839, 2 years after Jonathan Palin was buried in the cemetery here. Dad was a farmer and a merchant who opened a general store. Unfortunately, it was just as the tanning industry was leaving town. So business was hard at first, but luckily he had some political connections. They got him appointed postmaster in 1841, a few years before I was born. And as the tourists and artists began to show up, he converted our home into one of Palenville's first resorts, Teal House. It had 20 beds and was also the town post office and telegraph exchange. Now, this is the only picture I have of Teal House. And it's not the red building on the right, that's the post office in 1911. But if you notice over here, this is Teal House. And it stands where Rip and Wolf now stands. And this road leads to Saugerties. That's why there were not 20 beds in that building. I attended school in Palenville, and during the Civil War, I worked in the store. I also got involved in politics. I loved that Lincoln, which is how I got an appointment to a clerkship in the Customs House in New York City. And during that time, I married Addie Hinman, whose family owned Hinman Farm. Now, you probably know it as Rip Van Winkle Country Club now. She bore our only child, Creighton, and in 1878, I resigned my city job, moved back up to Palenville, where I built the Chelsea Resort. We built this part first. It's right across the road from Hinman Farm and had 60 beds. I also opened a bowling alley over on Malden with Lumen Lamoury. You've heard a couple of times about Lumen. He's quite a character. A few years later, Addie and I expanded the Wynn Chelsea up to 100 beds, and things were going great. That we were right across the road from Hinman Farm, and that it was very good. Business was very good. It got even better in 1883 when the Catskill Mountain Railway opened Palenville Station right across the road. There you go, on Hinman Farm. The turntable for the station, by the way, was, I believe, where hole number 3 is now. Right next to 23A going out. President Chester Arthur took the train to Palenville, stayed overnight at our resort, and things were going great. Then our luck ran out. In 1887, our son Creighton died. 4 years later, I died at the age of 50. We're buried together in the Teal family section of the cemetery now. Addie took over the Wynn Chelsea at the age of 38, and she operated it until she also died at the age of 50. 4 years later, the railroad closed down. The Wynn Chelsea, however, stayed in business for 95 years, till it burned to the ground in 1973. Truth be told, there's really nothing left of the Teal family here in Palenville, except for those of us in the cemetery. So if you can make it, do come to my 180th birthday party, August 18th at the cemetery. You can check my wish list on Amazon under Theodore Teal, T-E-A-L-E. See you then. Thank you.
But there were like 2 fires. The annex burned down first, and then
I'm not, I wasn't there. I heard about it. Yeah, the final burning, I gather, was in 73.
finally, yeah.
Yep. Any other questions? Thank you.
Good job.
Well, thanks to everyone for being part of this evening where we explore some of the charming history of Palenville via its past residents. My name is Edward Walker. Whenever we read or hear the last of the Mohawks as inscribed on my tombstone, you can't help but be intrigued and wonder what kind of history made him make this declaration. We'll talk a little bit more about that. We'll delve into my life here to see how the journey ended over here in the peaceful woods of the cemetery. Now, I want to point out something. We're recording this session, and because I was born in the 1800s, it's amazing that we're able to capture the motion and voice, and I can actually see the recording on this thing on my watch. How they do that? It's hard to fathom, isn't it? We can even zoom the camera. It's incredible. At my quiet grave site, you'll find the resting place for me and my son Abraham. Abraham was born in 1859 and died in 1938, living to the age of 79. That was me. Excuse me. I was born in 59, died in 78. Lived to the age of 79. My son Abraham F. Londo, who's also over there. In fact, you saw that right there. There's Abraham Londo. Was born in 1913, so I was 54 at the time of my son's birth. But he only lived to his mid-teens, passing in 1928. And unfortunately, there isn't much information on my son's early demise. I was born to a French-Canadian, Edward M. Londo, who coincidentally lived to the ripe old age of 79, just as I would. Sadly, we don't know the name of my French mother. My father, Edward M., immigrated from Quebec in the 1860s with his first wife and children. At this point, my parents were living with 5 other families at an Indian encampment, and this is the historical term, in Saratoga, New York. And we know, thanks to the 1875 census, the census taker made note of this Indian encampment. A basket weaver by trade, my father would sell his baskets to tourists who were drawn to the healing waters of Saratoga Springs during the summer months. My fellow Mohawks commonly migrated seasonally from Quebec to areas south, including to this Indian encampment in Saratoga. And that's where my father worked in the basket factory. My mother passed sometime between 1864 and 1872. My father remarried to Mary Ann Seduis, who was 18 years younger than my father, and just 8 years older than her oldest stepson. So she had some challenges. My father and stepmother Mary remained in Saratoga until their deaths and are buried there with 2 of their children. My son Frank is listed in the 1920 census as living in Ulster County, male, age 6, white, and having a mother who was born in Russia and speaks Hebrew. Jumping 10 years forward, the 1930 census lists me as living on West Saugerties Palenville Road with the occupation of basket weaver like my father. I lived alone. This would have been just 8 years before my death. I buried my 15-year-old son Abraham in the Palenville Cemetery in 1928, and 10 years later in 38, that's when I was buried there too. I was something of a celebrity in the area and worked as a personal guide to Presidents Theodore Roosevelt and Woodrow Wilson when they came to hunt in the Adirondacks. We know of several other Indians, likely Mohawk, who are also buried in our cemetery. The Curtis and Deo families, there are likely more Mohawks there once we dig deeper into the history of the cemetery. I lived my final days at the Bone Steel Sanitarium at 102 Main Street in Saugerties. Who knows what's near there? You may have eaten there. The Village Diner. So the sanitarium was right there. When I was taken to the sanitarium, it was discovered that my feet were badly burned because I'd been warming them in my oven just before the illness overtook me. Arteriosclerosis was listed as the cause of my death. I was discovered unconscious by a grocery man. I'm happy to report, however, that the nurses at the hospital treated me with great care because my old man's body was tender and suffered the slightest touch. And when I died, they quickly left. It was the first death at the new sanitarium, which accounted for the sadness of my passing. I was 79 years old. So how could he call himself the last of the Mohawks when there were other Mohawk descendants living? Most people think it kind of refers, he's lamenting the change of lifestyle, that the history of his father and him basket weaving, the whole culture of the Mohawks. It's not that there were physically going to be no more descendants of Mohawks, but that lifestyle, that classic kind of, North American Mohawk lifestyle was at its end. So, thank you very much. There was one note that was handwritten on a newspaper article. Last of the Mohawks goes to happy hunting ground.
That's so cool. In a school there. Because Abraham went there. He went there. Yes, sir.
It wasn't mentioned.
Up to Jenny.
What's Jenny?
Jenny. Jenny Grant.
Jenny.
There you
Oh, he's Jenny.
Heard about her.
I am here to introduce you to Jenny Craft. She was born in 1863 in Manor Hill, right down the street from where I live now, to Alida and Stephen Craft. She was baptized, confirmed, and buried as a communicant of the Gloria Dei Episcopal Church. At around age 15 or 16, Jenny nursed Rachel Trombore, the wife of Roland, through her illness. Rachel died in 1880 at the age of 36. Bart and Peggy Freeds have a letter from Rachel's husband, Roland, asking Jenny to return to his home to care for his young daughters. And she did. Roland and Jenny were married on May 28, 1882 in Saugerties. They were married for 44 years. They had 2 children, George Harding and Eva Anna. George Harding named after his cardinal. Eva and George are buried together in the Palenville Cemetery. Jenny was baptized as an adult the same day as her youngest child, on October 18, 1886. She died in Hamlet, April 5, 1939, at the age of 76, of a cerebral hemorrhage and arterial sclerosis. Jenny had a long life, but short story.
Hi, everybody. Well, I'm doing Eva Anna Trombore, and I guess anytime you're doing the research on this stuff, you have to talk about their relations. So it got me back to the first Trombores in Palenville was Johannes and his brother Jacob, and they Johannes was Eva Trombore's great-great-grandfather. Then the next generation, her great-grandfather had an odd name, Valentine Fierro. I guess Valentine you wouldn't think as a man's name. He died in 1830 and was born in 1762, lived to 68. And a lot of the Trombores, there's a lot of them in the Palenville Cemetery, but apparently there's an old Trombore burying ground off of Old Kings Highway in Saugerties, I guess. And Valentine Fierro's wife's name was Nellie Eli, which was Americanized from the Dutch. Elich was Dutch. And then we get to another generation, Eva's grandfather. His name was Elijah Woolsey Trombore. He lived from 1804 to 1887, and he married Mary Barton, as we spoke about. And then we get into Eva's father, and not to duplicate what Artie Freeze said, her father, Roland, was supervisor of maintenance at the Hotel Catterskill. He was a Teamster and a quarryman. In 1893, he was the Catterskill postmaster, and he was a farmer. And like we have some overlaps here. His first wife, Rachel Alice Wincoop, died very early. She was born in 1844 and died in 1880, only 36 years old. I don't know why she died that young, but then he married Jenny Trombore, who was the mother of Eva. There's 3 generations of people buried in the Palenville Cemetery. So Eva Anna, she was born in 1886 and lived to 1970. So she lived to a ripe old age of 84 years old. And the thing that's sort of notable about her is that she was a lifelong school teacher. and she taught in various places, mostly in New Jersey, and she would come back to Palenville when she had breaks. Now, the last time I did this presentation, I just noted that women school teachers weren't allowed to marry, and now I thought, like, I kind of got into it a little bit, like, what was that all about? Why weren't women school teachers allowed to marry? So then it got me into this misogynist part of our whole culture. And the reason women were not allowed to marry was because, this sounds really weird, farmers didn't want their kids to see a pregnant woman teaching them. I don't know what the big deal is. They must have dealt with pregnant animals all the time, but I guess, you know, normally marriage leads to pregnancy, and you know, if they had to leave their teaching job to take care of their kids, they would be hard to replace. And they got it from all ways. Like, they were expected women teachers were expected to devote their lives to other people's children, but they weren't allowed to have any of their own. So it was generally understood that female teachers would resign from their posts upon holy matrimony. And so, you know, somebody who lived to be 84, like Eva Trombore, and she retired when she was 62, so she was like a lifelong teacher. And, you know, I have a word like school marm, which sounds sort of like, you know, not the nicest thing. And, you know, the men didn't have to do any of, you know, they could do whatever they wanted, but maybe they were considered the income providers. So it was just discrimination against married teachers in the United States. And that didn't end until 1964 with the passing of the Civil Rights Act, that women were allowed to be married. Yes?
Eva is in the white suit in the middle there, I believe.
I think that's her. Is that her in the white suit? I couldn't figure out.
Eva, is that Eva in the center there?
No.
I was gonna defer to Art, because I was decoding that just from
I
reading
think
people's
she's
names.
either the one to the right, I think she's 2 over from the center.
It's like there's more names there than are.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, there's a back row of people who didn't get scanned with this photo. You can see their
Oh,
suits.
sure, it's a trick question.
Well, maybe she lived so long because she didn't have a whole bunch of kids like other women did, and they say she lived a very colorful life, and she had a very active social life.
And no husband.
And no husband, so she had a lot of friends, and you know, it's hard to really tell what people were like. You know their birth dates and their marriage dates and their death dates, but you don't know, like, did they have a sense of humor? Were they funny? You know, what were they really like? But I assume she was an interesting person, you know, lifelong teacher. She retired at the age of 65 and lived to 84, so assume she had, and then she retired here in Palenville. So maybe she enjoyed the rest of her life in retirement. And that's a brief story of Eva Trombore.
Last one. And it's a fun one. My name is Mary Douglas. Now, you're not going to see any tombstone or anybody in the Palenville Cemetery. The reason that my story is being told tonight, there's this picture here, and it's a real photograph. And on the back, you see there's my name, Mary Douglas, Palenville, New York. Okay? So, because we're not eating or drinking, I will pass my very precious picture around. And you can see what a lovely little girl I was. And my story comes through because someone was given a pile of letters, this photograph, and they said, Palenville, I'm going to look online and see if there's people that love history that might take this and keep it. And so we get a package in the mail with my story. And along with that is a very poor copy of a newspaper article that was about me when I was a little girl. And this article was by the New York Press, and the date on it is October 25th, 1908. And what it's about is a very special doll. What happened when I was a little girl, I was passed this wonderful doll that had been through many, many generations. And because it says here in the paper I was intelligent and I would take care of it, then I was passed this doll, and it came with me to Palenville. And so this doll is very representative of old New York and the trip that a lot of people make from New York to Palenville to live. So I want to read you a little bit about this. The doll itself came to a little girl named Margaret Monahan. And she lived, first of all, her family was at the very tip of Manhattan. And then there was the big yellow fever scare in 1822, when all of a sudden anyone with money, the banks, the stores, anything that mattered, moved up a little in the island away to get better air. And they moved to a nice little rural community called Greenwich Village. And the Monahan family was one of those. There were 18 different big manor houses where these well-to-do families got out of the muck of the inn and moved uptown a little bit. So little Margaret Monahan was with her mother, and this is all in this 1905 newspaper article, that one day she was shopping to, I suppose it's pronounced Jennings Bazaar. Does anybody know what that is? It was apparently one of the first incredible department stores in New York City. And they say, here it is, Jennings was famous because while almost all the other stores in New York occupied only one long, dark, narrow room on the ground floor, at Jennings you could go upstairs and see things on the second floor as well. And I read a little bit more about the founder. They said he was more like a P.T. Barnum. He had events there, and he had a lot of special things there. And apparently this was one of these things, this doll. So it was around 1840 when Margaret went into the store, and they said it was the proprietor himself that says, "I have something wonderful to show you." He took them to a chair in which sat the most wonderful doll Margaret had ever seen. She could not believe it was a doll until someone took it down and let her touch it. Measured beside a child of 4 years, the doll was the taller of the two. It had real hair on its head, curled with natural curls. And it said that it was the fashion of the days to cut little girls' hair every summer. So it's very likely that it was some little girl's curls that were made into this doll. So Margaret thought it was wonderful, but it cost all of $4. And this man right here is very good at looking at his apps, and the equivalent would be about $120. And she couldn't imagine ever paying that for a doll. But sure enough, long story short, because it is a long story, it showed up Christmas morning. Her dad bought her that doll. And it was just the most wonderful thing. She named it Mary Thomas after her mother and her father. And that doll was her most prized possession. And then it was passed down through a couple of generations until some friends of mine had the doll stored, and they realized that I, Mary Douglas, would like the doll. So the doll came to Palenville. Now, in closing, I wanted to tell you, in this newspaper article, talks a little bit about a place that we know very well. At the foot of the Catskills stands
the original village of Falling Waters, immortalized by Washington Irving and Joseph Jefferson in Rip Van Winkle. Palenville is the name of the village, and the exact spot where Rip enjoyed his 20 years nap is halfway up the mountain, about 3/4 comfortable. A broad and beautiful lawn sweeps before it. Cherry, plum, pear, and apple trees bower it, and there's a great harbor. There's a barn for the family horse, carriage and sleigh, a chicken yard in which roam 150 chickens of high degree. Not your normal chicken. There's an old-fashioned kitchen garden in which borders of gay blooms hedge the vegetables. Back of all the grounds, in a terrace on which there's a grove of beautiful pine trees, a children's paradise, and in this pleasant home lives Mary Douglas, daughter of the Methodist minister. Mary is a good child, not apt to throw dolls around or tear them to pieces, and to her one day Mary Thomas was given by the woman who had taken care of her for many years. So, after all of that story, I, Mary Douglas, grew old, and some of these letters that I wrote to my family members said I wanted that doll to be treasured and go somewhere where my own grandchildren and great-grandchildren can see her. So the doll was donated to the Museum of the City of New York.
Oh.
Right, so none of us have made that trek yet to go see Mary Thomas. But as I, Mary Douglas, citizen of Palenville, request that you may put that on your list and to go visit the doll at the city.
Do you have any idea how big the doll was?
Well, they said they're as big as a 3 or 4-year-old
Oh my
child.
God. Whoa.
Yeah. But the takeaway on all this is the man who sent us this was Christian Hess. I don't know if he's anyone knows here. But it's wonderful when people can either look in a garage sale or the closets and get this type of history to the people who care about it. And that's our night tonight, besides ice cream. I do want to point out that we have put the signs back out at the cemetery for a couple of weeks. And some of the stories that you heard tonight, if you go there, you can see where their grave is, and there is a QR code that will pull up some of these pictures that we've been talking about and seeing. Okay.
For coordinating.